Good afternoon. My name is Eleanor Torsian, and I am 15 years old. Up to 6 months ago, I was living in Egypt, and although my love for that country is immense, I had to witness on a daily basis the atrocity that is pollution. Thousands of years ago, the flooding of the Nile regulated Egypt's agricultural and economic success. Nowadays, the Nile is just a polluted river, the same way Cairo is just a polluted city. And therefore, Egypt's contribution to climate change is massive, leading me to care about it from a very young age. I am here today to introduce the topic of regenerative agriculture. Regenerative agriculture describes farming and grazing practices that, among other benefits, reverse climate change by rebuilding soil organic matter and restoring degraded soil biodiversity, resulting in both carbon drawdown and an improved water cycle. By capturing carbon in soil and other biomass, regenerative agriculture can potentially reverse the current path of global warming. As a child, I did not understand how bad global warming truly was, but today, I regularly see headlines, such as one from the United Nations, saying that we only have 11 years to prevent irreversible damage to our planet. This is my generation's future at stake, and as proven by our marches against climate change that occurred all over Europe not too long ago, we care about it. According to soil scientists, within 50 years, we will no longer have enough soil available to feed ourselves. The crazy thing? Regenerative agriculture can put an end to this destruction. Egypt had an incredible agricultural history stretching back to the roots of human civilization. Back then, the Nile flooding restored degraded soil the same way nowadays regenerative agriculture rebuilds soil organic matter. Ronnie Cummings, our Regeneration International Steering Committee member, once said while talking about regenerative agriculture, one of the best kept secrets in the world today is that the solution to global warming and the climate crisis lies right under our feet. I personally cannot wait to hear more about it and look forward to the talks ahead. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much, Eleonora, and all these wonderful innovators who are inspiring us so much. We will now watch the documentary Food for Thought by Susan Rockefeller, who's an award-winning documentarist and conservationist. And after we will have a panel with two fantastic, knowledgeable people on this topic, so we can explore all the degrees of regenerative agriculture, where we are, where we're going. We'll be with Rens Glinde and with David Barber. Thank you very much.
It's a very hopeful thing to see so many people here with an interest in farming, because you're going to be finding solutions for the next bunch who are going to come after you.
It's almost like the Wild West with all the things that are going on in food. There's innovation and there's tradition and new things, old things, all getting thrown in the pot and stirred up.
We all said years ago that we wanted our food fast, convenient, and cheap, and that's what we expected farmers to supply. Even our Secretary of Agriculture said that farmers had to learn to get big or get out. Now, all of that worked reasonably well as long as we had cheap energy, inexpensive fertilizers, a lot of surplus fresh water. Fairly stable climate. So we have to start really rethinking how we're going to produce our food under these new circumstances.
So we have this incredible presence today of agriculture dominating our planet, but we completely depend on it. We have to provide food to something like 7 billion people in the world today.
You know, we hear a lot of times that we've got to figure out how to produce more food, and that means we've got to intensify the current system. That's what we call commodity agriculture. A farmer will grow just 1 or 2 varieties of crops, like in Iowa, a corn and soybean farmer, those are the only 2 crops they'll grow. Or a hog farmer, so you're just producing hogs. And we now have these huge monocultures of grains to feed animals in concentration. And then, of course, if you do that, then you have to bring a lot of inputs in from outside the farm in order to sustain that. So you bring in your fertilizers, you bring in your pesticides. And where we have these concentrated animals, we're producing more manure in a particular location. And so then you have waste disposal problem. You use a lot of energy. It now takes about 10 units of energy for every 1 unit of food that we produce. But when you put a food system together, which actually looks at producing more of different kinds of food from the same acreage, you can actually produce much more food than you can with the specialized monocultures.
So what we have to do, I think, is invent a new kind of agriculture that blends the best ideas of commercial agriculture in the Green Revolution with the best ideas of organic farming and local food, and the best ideas of environmental conservation.
We're gonna head over towards our vegetable fields so we can see how we rotate our crops, how we manage our soils, what we grow and why, with flavor in mind, nutrition in mind, land stewardship as well, which is a huge part of what we do here.
Our mission here at the Stone Barns is to be an education and demonstration site. We're demonstrating that you can not only produce food, but actually produce much better food that's much better tasting by not having these energy-intensive inputs from the outside, but rather turning your wastes into better, healthier soil and be a partner with nature in producing really good, delicious food.
That's what makes this place very different than other farms. We can combine evolution technology and also traditional knowledge. But what's more important is that we can show them the broad system of nature and how it works.
And then to ask what nature will do for you, what she'll allow you to do, and then what she'll help you to do. And the great Kentucky South Down sheep breeder Henry Basudin used to say, it's wonderful to have nature working for you. She works for a minimum wage.
The soil, the land, it's always talking to us. It's always telling us if it's happy or sad, or you can tell by the way the plants are growing, by the wildlife that's present, by the types of weeds that are growing, and you can see where the color of the soil is changing, and you may need to put some other nutrients into that soil to help bring it back up to that rich lushness that nature loves and thrives on so well.
There is an intimate connection between the quality of the soil and the quality of the plants that come from growing them in that soil.
Soil is a very dynamic living community. There's more life beneath the surface of the soil than there is above the surface of the soil.
Much like our own digestive system processes all of our food, the microbes in our digestive tract allow nutrients to be absorbed for us. The soil itself is doing that same process for the plant. And the plant is pumping all sorts of resources down to feed the soil life. And from that perspective, we see that the two parts of the equation are actually one part.
Oh God, it's beautiful, insatiable, the way our chemicals collide.
They've discovered the diversity of microbes in the farm soil is having a protective effect on our own physiologies. We need to preserve the health of the soil if we are going to preserve our own health. Not for future generations, but for right now.
If you have biologically healthy soil, you can reduce your fertilizer and pesticide input by 90%.
We don't spray pesticides. We are using strictly compost and raw food sources for the soils. We're not fertilizing the grounds in any of the areas.
So you think about the amount of energy that you decrease. And it also becomes extremely important in terms of the amount of water that we use for irrigation, because when you have biologically healthy soil, the soil absorbs and retains much more moisture. There are a lot of things that we know we need to do and can do to restore the biological health of soil. That's what gives us a quality of life.
Every seed has a story to share. Seeds are small, they're unassuming, and they're everything. The food we eat, the clothes we wear, every environment is surrounded by seeds that have phenomenally adapted.
Here at Fruition Seeds, we're very fond of eggplant, and when you're saving seed of them, you let them go well past their edible maturity.
As a seed farm, we customize seed to thrive in the Northeast. That is one of the pieces that we have control over. As we start to see the climate shift and climate change and all those issues, I can't snap my fingers and tell everybody to drive a little less, turn your lights off a little more. But I can work with plants at the genetic level and continuing year after year, select the plants that are going to do the best in the climate and the conditions that we have now.
Paying attention to the uniqueness of regional ecologies is going to become extremely important as we move into our new future. And seed companies that are a part of the industrial food system want to produce one variety of seed that they can sell all over the world, and so they want to keep the current system going.
There are those who could deem me an outlaw because I saved my own seed, and that it should come to that. And we grew up saving seed.
It means giving power back to farmers as well to breed their own varieties for their own regions, and we work with farmers that do that.
Plant breeding is actually quite simple. You identify varieties that have characteristics that you want, disease resistance, end-use quality, winter hardiness, and then you hybridize them.
We're not talking about producing less, we'd be talking about producing more, but more of what makes sense.
And the farmers have realized, gee, if I can develop some sort of local regional market that pays for the true quality of the thing that I'm doing, then I'll have much better livelihood and it will reinstate community again.
People have to have a fair wage. They have to be able to make a living. That includes the worker in the field, the farmer stewarding the land, the person selling the produce. We've cut out the middleman. We're bringing directly to the consumer. And we're growing for flavor. We're growing for color, knowing that a dark leafy green has higher nutritional value to it. And those are the types of vegetables that I'll select.
The plant breeders have been under the same kind of pressure that we put the farmers under to increase yields as much as possible. And so when you focus just on breeding for higher yields, then of course you're not breeding for food quality.
When you breed for flavor, you're breeding for health. It's not anti-technology, it's not Luddite, it's not going back to caveman breeding. This is like using the future, but using it appropriately.
What you feel makes part of what I'll feel. It's a chain reaction.
The easiest way to connect with healthy ecological relationships on a farm is to taste food. Taste really good food.
Put out love, and now feel love. It's a chain reaction.
You know, I think one of the things that informed me as a chef is to look at food ecologically. We need to become closer to what a particular place is demanding that we grow and then support that through a diet. That varies throughout this country, throughout the world. We all have to learn the genius of our place and then we have to cook with it.
Right on, man.
You know, we eat high on the hog, which is the expression of eating that pork, that center cut of meat. What we need to look at is the whole animal. That's the nose-to-tail philosophy of farm-to-table cooking, but it should be looking at nose-to-tail philosophy of the entirety of the farm. And that means the in-between crops, that means the brassicas, that means grain crops, the cover crops, the crops that are supporting soil fertility. You know, I think chefs play a huge role in this future because with these lowly cuts of meat, these lowly grains, you end up requiring an expertise, a craftsmanship. And if you look to the future, you can see, you know, wide open possibilities for an exciting culinary frontier that we've never experimented with.
But we have this really unique community here where we're able to have farmers, educators, and chefs all working together. And I like to describe the place as a place that kind of aspires to be a laboratory.
Today, it so happens that there's a group of 24 chefs from around the world that are visiting this wonderful Blue Hill at Stone Barn, eating Chef Dan Barber's wonderful cuisine of things that have been grown here in his farm, and it's really nature-driven. It's not what I dictate as a chef that I want tomatoes during the winter time. It's really what nature should dictate.
I'm hoping with your arrival that you can help us continue this conversation and share experiences from your own countries about how things work in your world and how we might all come together to connect all the different parts of the food system.
I think what made the biggest impression for me today is how it all connects together. Things that we should be doing to begin with, things that are right for our environment, they actually taste the best.
The most diverse farms have the best resilience. We have fruit production, vegetable production, and animal production, and they coexist in a way that improves each other. That's what you want. You want tons of diversity, and within that diversity, you always get the best flavor.
Where there's flavor, there are nutrients. Where there are nutrients, there is health. So, wouldn't it be a perfect world if everybody could just get their hands on a really great tomato? But it's not a perfect world. There's this thing that we call food deserts. No grocery stores, no good food, because they just can't afford it. Why is processed food so inexpensive and a great tomato so expensive? Well, it's because we have all these subsidies and billions of dollars that are going to 5 crops, one of which you cannot eat unless anyone's ever tried salting their jeans. That's why you can get a bag of snack chips or some of those cheese thingies for 3 to 5 times less than they should sell for. They've already been paid for.
Farm subsidies, $60 billion. The 10% at the top, the very largest operators, take in 74% of the money.
We've dramatically increased yields of a few commodities, but we haven't really increased food for people where people are.
Just like 26.5 million other Americans, I live in a food desert, South Central Los Angeles. Liquor stores, fast food, vacant lots. People are dying from curable diseases in South Central Los Angeles. I see wheelchairs bought and sold like used cars. I see dialysis centers popping up like Starbucks.
We could actually have a better quality of life if we invested in better food, invested in our own local communities, and began to reduce, our healthcare costs.
Diabetes and obesity is most prevalent in these communities. Introduce affordability and choice becomes possible. Somebody on food stamps, if they want to buy fresh fruits and vegetables, we double their money.
I planted a food forest in front of my house. See, I'm an artist. Gardening is my graffiti. You'd be surprised what the soil could do if you let it be your canvas. I have witnessed my garden become a tool for the education, a tool for the transformation of my neighborhood.
I am not a farmer. I'm a parent. I'm a resident and I'm a teacher. And from day one, we are growing in my classroom. And my kids from the poorest congressional district in America became the first to install the first edible wall in New York City. So if you're hungry, get up and eat. That's the food. Where does it go? 0 miles to plate, right down into the cafeteria. Or, more importantly, to local shelters where most of our kids are getting 1 to 2 meals a day. And we're stepping it up. We started installing these walls in schools that look like this, with lighting like that, 21st century technology. And what do you know? We made 21st century money, and that was groundbreaking.
Growing your own food is like printing your own money. I want to plant a whole block of gardens where people can share in the food. I want to take shipping containers and turn them into healthy cafes, putting people to work and getting kids off the street.
And what does it really do? It teaches kids to revision their community, so when they grow up in places like this, they can imagine it like this. I'm growing organic citizens.
I want us all to become ecolutionary, renegades, gangster gardeners. Get gangster with your shovel and let that be your weapon of choice.
There is, in fact, a sense that this could be the beginnings of a kind of revolution within the food system. Producing food within a food hub, which is a region where people in the community consume the food that's produced. It isn't a commodity that gets transported to be manufactured or processed somewhere else.
Community-owned grocery stores, food carts, food delivery trucks, urban farms, vertical farms, restaurants, bakeries, all contracting with one another, ensuring that they're going to keep money in these communities.
we have a lot of good ideas here, but not any one of these is a silver bullet. In fact, what I think they are is more like silver buckshot. And I love silver buckshot. You put it together and you've got something really powerful, but we need to put them together.
It's not going to happen through one chef. It's not going to happen through one farmer. The challenge is to change the culture through a collaboration, which is how you produce the best food in nature. It's how you produce the best food in a kitchen. And it's how you produce, I think, the ability to change the world through food.
Here right now, in my opinion, is very much the cutting edge of a new movement forward in the public becoming more aware of what they eat and where it comes from.
This vision of regionally based agriculture is not only very possible, but in fact is necessary, especially if we're going to have a light footprint on the earth. It's inevitable.
You came up from the ground, from a million little pieces.
The era of cheap energy is over. We're depleting our freshwater resources, our soil health, and we got to add climate change into the equation. And then, of course, you have to ask the whole question about human health.
When it all comes crashing down, to understand your meaning. No one said it would be easy.
Every single one of us has, in some way, shape, or form, to take action. And maybe that action is something as simple as choosing where you buy your food from.
Know your farmer if you possibly can. Talk to the people who work in the produce section at your favorite store. Talk to the people that actually are serving you food. Tell them the kind of things you like. You can actually influence more than you might think.
A balanced diet, which has less meat and a much higher percentage of whole foods and a smaller percentage of processed foods, this creates a healthy ecology.
You can begin to recycle and put the resources that you take from the farm back into the farm. And we can do this in urban areas now through composting systems.
You can plant your own garden, whether you're urban or rural. There is the community gardens, rooftop gardens.
Even the smallest window plot will start to shift your nutrition. You can grow spices in there, you can grow herbs in there, you can begin to cook. The minute you start to work with the raw materials of food, you really start to care about what these materials are like.
To change the community, you have to change the composition of the soil. We are the soil.
Pick up your phone and call your member of Congress. Tell them you want a farm bill that's a food bill, that protects the land, that protects low-income people who need the benefits, that invests in organic agriculture and healthier school lunches. I can't guarantee that they will listen. If you don't do it, I can promise you we'll get more of the same, and it's not good enough.
Everything you need is here. Everything you fear is here. And it's holding you up. It just keeps holding you up.
We have to change our practices. We all eat, we all have a choice, we all have a vote about how that goes.
Sit down to a meal and be casting a vote for the way you want the world to be used. You know, that's not a grandiose statement when you multiply that over the number of people that are eating 3 times a day.
Your power to buy and create and destroy things is your own. You can create a beautiful world around you. You can create the world you want to live in.
Just start with one seed, and the possibilities are endless.
All we are saying is step forward, oh no, no.
So let's give a warmer hand to Susan Rockefeller, because the reason this touches deep chords is because it combines information, feeling, art, emotions, sensations. That's what we need holistically as an involvement in order to really evolve towards more holistic forms of agriculture. So Susan, please join us on the stage along with Okay, 2 words on her while we then prep for our other guests. So Susan has all this in her experience because not only is she an award-winning documentarist, she is deeply involved in the arts and in the hands-on experience of agriculture. I can sit here in the corner, and it will be a the intention is to have a very interactive panel also with Renske Lind, who instead is a philanthropist and an investor and can give us that other perspective on how it's important to be able to support initiatives that then need and deserve to grow. And instead, David is the brother of Dan Barber, and he is deeply involved with all the initiatives that have their signature. And it's so important to have model farms because, as we mentioned yesterday during the opening of Seeds and Chips, there's so much more experience versus data in really accounting for the power of regenerative agriculture. So being able to see hands-on what happens is vital at this stage because we really need to change mentalities. So why is this? I would like to link really the impact of what we saw with a very impactful source of information, which is Drawdown, edited by the American ecologist Paul Hawken, who brought together 100 top world scientists and actually found, the scientists are more than 100, but he identified 100 solutions that together could reverse climate change. The food system is really the first in all its various aspects that can drive this change. And so what we saw really is so upbeat that I would like to know, Susan, what brought you to make this documentary one of many and all touching and poignant, but why did you actually do this one?
So thank you. Can everybody hear me? That's better. Well, I have to say, I sit on the board of Stone Barn Center for Food and Agriculture, and in 2004, my father-in-law, David Rockefeller, and my sister-in-law, Peggy Delaney, created Stone Barns along with Blue Hill. And I'm honored to be on that board, and the innovation that is happening is extraordinary. And I didn't feel that there was a film. There's many films that are out there on sort of the food issues, and they're all educational and wonderful, but I wanted to add the culture of what it means to be farming and the beauty and the poetry and the fact that what's happening really at Stone Barns and Blue Hill is the culture. It's a cultural institution that's looking at the interface between farming and gastronomy. And so much of us, and many of us, are here because we love food and we're interested in the food system and we understand how complex the issues are, the systemic issues. So I wanted to have a film that was short, that could be used with panels, that addressed both a local solution, but also looked at some of the politics in terms of food justice, and then looking at how you can obviously bring that to scale globally. But it was really wanting to highlight what I think is some of the most innovative research and development that's happening at Stone Barns and Blue Hill. And then obviously looking at the broader issues of the food system and how we need to innovate and really come up with solutions that are good for planetary and human health.
Thank you. Now, we have two parallel challenges, which are, to innovate and to disrupt, or to disrupt and to innovate. So there's a status quo, even when it comes to farming practices. No-tilling, for example, is something that, go talk to any farmer who is maybe disconnected from the previous generation, but unless they really have, I'd like to also hear what your experience is here, but I love being in nature and around, are we making this noise? No. And around the around farms. And if you have this conversation, people will be like, no, 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 you need to refresh the ground. Well, what we know is that in reality, we're releasing all those precious nutrients that are in the ground, and they evaporate, and then not only they cause and they increase global warming. So between Renske and David, who would like to have the disruptive answer and who would like to have the scaling answer? Because the two can happen at the same time, but I think that scaling is more aspiring, but maybe disruptive is more masculine. Do you want to be the destroyer of the system before we talk about how we regenerate new ones?
I don't know. I don't know about destroyer. I think the system, as we know it today, is likely to self-destruct on its own. But the amount of time and the amount of damage that can take place if we're not proactive is frightening, and we should and are, I think, starting to do as much as we can to either get ahead of it, or if it's going to take a catastrophic event to wake people up, end of free water would probably be the one that is likely to come about sooner rather than later. Those pillars that Fred Kirschman was referring to, cheap energy, free water, consistent weather, you remove any one of those three from the way things have run over the last 50, 100 years, and the current food system really is a big house of cards, and if it comes crashing down in any kind of an abrupt way, that's not an inconvenience. That's a global event that will lead to wars and famine and dire consequences. So at the very least, I think there's an obligation of people who are in the privileged position to be able to afford to work on it. And by that I mean they're getting enough nutrients to sustain themselves comfortably, to work on regenerative and sustainable methods of producing food. At least sets a path for how the rest of the world may adapt when we get there. And again, I think it's a question of when, not if. I hope it's a smooth transition, but as history has taught us, a lot of times it's not so smooth.
But there's one aspect that needs to be disrupted, which is the subsidies, and that's something that's mentioned, but that allows producers of processed foods to sell them for less than it actually costs them, and then it makes a healthy tomato inaccessible. And what I'm finding also is that many Americans' taste buds are dying. I mean, they can't recognize the difference between the flavor of a real tomato. Then when they come to Italy, they're like, the food's so incredible. But, fruit does not taste the way it should, and vegetables don't taste the way they should either. So when I meant disruption, I was like, let's not wait for these catastrophes to happen, because that will really be too late. And how do we disrupt this unfortunate stronghold and vested, position of vested interest that many are still holding on to, despite the data really pointing them in another way?
Go ahead, Renske.
I think that it would be great to talk about row 7 in this context too, but I think this is where we leverage the power of the markets, and we leverage the fact that consumer demand really is drawing us into a system that does prioritize these types of outcomes and characteristics. So there are a number of solutions out there that are really helping shift the paradigm and support the kinds of production practices that can really draw all the way through from soil health to human health. And we know that our taste buds have evolved to actually seek out the highest flavor, has the highest nutrient density. So I think that might be a good pivot.
I would just add one word of caution, because the subsidy issue gets a lot of airtime as being a root cause of this, and rightfully so. It should be changed over time, but it's not as if you remove the subsidies and the problem is going to solve itself. In fact, in the short term, it could make matters worse, and by that I mean that the subsidies do not account for the large amount of infrastructure and corporate investment that has gone into the existing system. And that's an area that's not actually covered so much in the film, but an important one to keep in mind is that the system has been built not only with subsidies, but with corporate dollars that support this sort of large infrastructure investments. These assets sit on large corporate balance sheets, and they're not going to stop using them, and they're going to be depreciating them, over the next 30 years. We need to convince them to invest in other kinds of infrastructure Changing subsidies may help them do that, but it's a combination of factors. The other piece is consumer education, retraining those taste buds to appreciate the quality that comes from good agriculture and flavorful food. And again, that's a whole nother pot of money that needs to be devoted to people. When they can touch it, as some of the examples in the film demonstrated, an urban garden, I think that work is super important. But it's not going to solve the food needs of America to say anything about the world. We're not going to grow all of our food in cities. So large farms outside growing diversity is a big challenge. And you need markets for those ingredients in the rotation. And by definition, that's a different diet. Not so easy.
It's a totally. I love, oh, sorry. Do you have a microphone probably there? I love the way you start by saying, please listen. And that's why often when I talk about these things, I always invite people to bring anything that has to do with future-proof development to the level of feeling. Because I feel like it's all in here, but why is it not coming down? So thank you for starting your film with quiet, listen. And we mentioned Broken Nature before, which everyone can get a taste of here, and it's at the Triennale di Milano. And there's a work that Paola Antonelli brought, was on loan from the Fondation Cartier, and it's the Orchestra of Animals. And it's incredible when you put yourself in a quiet space and you listen to nature and you observe, and also those time lapses of a germinating seed, and the magic that we take far too for granted, what life is in a seed and what potential is there, is an important reminder. But how do you feel, what do you think, do you feel that we need to wait for a catastrophe for things to really change at a massive scale? Do you think these numbers that Drawdown has, which are from an estimated 108 million acres of current adoption, Drawdown estimates regenerative agriculture could increase to a total of 1 billion acres by 2050, which could result in a total reduction of 23.2 gigatons of carbon dioxide. And regenerative agriculture could provide $1.9 trillion financial return by 2050 on an investment of $57 billion. So, maybe that lead is the trigger for then people who are so who prioritize the economic return over the health returns. So what do you think? How do you balance those two drivers?
Well, I would think that obviously Drawdown did a lot of research, and what's interesting to think about is that the number 2 issue, actually it's number 1, if you put women and education and maternal health, it's the number 1 solution to climate change. So you've got women at the top, and then you've got agriculture as number 2. And the majority of women in the developing world are involved in farming. So if you look at those two as key levers, especially in terms of education, I think there's a chance at really using that regenerative agriculture to draw down the carbon. So I think that, obviously with the Sustainable Development Goals, and there's so many different stakeholders, and many of them are here at the Seeds and Chips conference. So it's a really collaborative, as Dan said in the film, a collaborative effort, because we can't do this alone. We can't be in silos. We have to work together. So I think that when we get the numbers and we have the research, it will direct us towards some of these solutions. And hopefully some of those subsidies will be reallocated. And according to, if you look at, and I hope everybody goes to the Broken Nature exhibition, but it really is about design solutions, and so much of agriculture and even what we think about in terms of reimagining what our plate looks like has to do with redesigning these ecosystems that consider the whole, all the rotations, and looking at a no waste circular economy. So what does that look like if you think of the fact that 30 or 40% of our food system involves waste, and I think the average is 300 pounds per person, and if you aggregate that, food waste is the number 3. If it was a country, it would be number 3 in terms of climate change or climate issues. So, you know, that along with ocean and ocean waste, if we could actually address these systems holistically, I think the solutions will emerge.
And I think that really when we talk about design, our lifestyle is really a big act of design. Every choice we make is actually triggering or acting upon solutions. And that's why I'm so happy that there's this taste of broken nature. And there's a lot of stimulating facts and provocations, and you really come out of there thinking, okay, we know we have it all. But as my friend, because he's become a friend, Chris Jordan, the photographer, says, you know, after spending 8 years, he did a documentary on albatross who died choking on plastic, which they inadvertently exchanged for food, and it became an incredibly long process. He kept on going back to Midway Island because, you know, and Midway, and it's the most remote island from any continent. And so in the end, you know, his point is, and I wonder whether you agree, is that really the first solution is, though also the least measurable, and it's consciousness. So how do we, do you agree? And he says, you know, it's frustrating. Everyone's interested in my work, and then, so they're like, oh, we'd like to invest in you, and what will the return be? Well, he's like, well, the return would be massive, but it's not measurable. So how do you feel about that? Putting consciousness on the list of solutions and pitching it in a way so that investors would say, okay, you know what, even if I don't see my immediate return in terms of dollars, I know I'm doing something very important for humanity.
I would just say that there's a very large role for philanthropists and foundations to look at the plastic pollution issue. So and obviously Chris Jordan, I know his work and it's phenomenal, but I don't know who would invest necessarily in him except as an artist, because he makes beautiful photographs illustrating plastic pollution in the ocean. So anyway, I'm just saying that's one.
But as you know, because of your well-rounded experience, an artist is a witness of a process, and is also, not only do you witness a process, but then you make a process. I think creating any art form is a process. And so in the end, he's so knowledgeable about all this that, you know, versus people who talk about, because there's so many misinterpretations in terms of language. And, you know, we talk about, for example, I don't want to go on to the plastic issue, but it's interesting, your remark, and I think that's what he suffers from. And many people who are hands-on, for example, going back to the food deserts. Now, why don't you think that any of these people in stretches of endless miles of land in America have a home garden, for example? Why don't, because haven't we all driven through many, you know, many regions and cities and areas of the Midwest where, you know, it's the only place you can eat is a McDonald's, and there's no sign of a home farm, a home garden anywhere?
I'm happy to take a stab at that, and then we can circle back to consciousness, I think, because it is in large part also about just awareness, and maybe that's what you're talking about. And so to Sue's point, the role of philanthropy to really raise awareness about issues, you know, that's what the work that I've been doing for over 20 years is working in the nonprofit sector, funded by foundations that recognize some of the challenges and problems and do a great job at really surfacing awareness about those issues. And then my current role is to find the innovative solutions that are actually delivering promising solutions, for profit or nonprofit, to address some of those bigger challenges. I think in terms of your question about home gardens, I mean, again, I think we've, in the US at least, we've taken culinary skills out of the school environment. So most kids are graduating without actually knowing how to, not your kids obviously, and hopefully not mine, but are graduating without the ability to even cook their own meal. And so we've been so disconnected because we've designed a system in the US that prioritizes convenience and logistics and shelf life. It does not prioritize the kinds of qualities and attributes and characteristics of direct engagement with our food. That's changing. In terms of food access, food deserts, I think there's an even bigger set of challenges associated that are related to poverty and food insecurity more broadly. So that's a thornier one to try to unpack in this context, I think.
But see, even poverty, I mean, you can regenerate your own seeds, you know. In fact, we see it, we do it. It's so much fun so you don't even really, there's seed banks where you can trade seeds. But unfortunately, it's the idea is that then you feel that if you don't have means, you can't grow a piece of land. It doesn't have to be your land. It can belong to your town, your village. So do you think that's a mentality that can spread and change this idea that if you're poor, you can't grow your own garden?
Absolutely can. One of the organizations, so I run an accelerator that supports both for-profit and nonprofit entrepreneurs, and one of them is building that exact type of environment in Silicon Valley. And part of what the entrepreneur realized is that when he was trying to do urban education and urban gardening classes in urban settings, there weren't culturally appropriate seeds available for immigrant communities to grow foods that they're accustomed to and familiar with. So then they actually had to start a whole new business germinating seeds that are appropriate for that community. So there are absolutely ways in which I think this can be addressed, but it does take time and behavior change and the complexities of poverty and working multiple jobs. It's not an easy proposition.
Yeah, I would just echo on that issue of economic circumstance and type of people that you're asking to change their habits and how. And the example that one of the ones that really surprised me that I found so shocking on the educational issue was an initiative that passed in New York and other states in the U.S. that was requiring fast food establishments, I think with more than 10 or 12 outlets, to post calorie counts to show consumers what they were buying and what a Big Mac or the equivalent actually represented on a calorie basis. And in New York, Mike Bloomberg was a huge proponent and spent a bunch of money to really get it passed and promoted. It was passed. All fast food restaurants started to comply. And in lower income, poor neighborhoods, from a health perspective, it was an absolute disaster because what the customer did was walk in and buy the absolute worst thing because they wanted their dollars for their children to get as many calories as possible, like more bang for their buck. So they were literally scanning the menu board which was what essentially was a health warning and taking the worst possible choice. So that's an example of well-intended education and or government intervention that without an understanding of the actual psyche of the person you're communicating with can really go the other way.
But also, there was a really interesting article recently on the myth of the calorie. Okay, what we're counting is not necessarily what we need to be counting.
Yeah, it's not
what
nutrition.
is not in those equations is all the nutrition. Then there's a whole dark area of all these wonderful nutrients that are not even on the radar. So unfortunately, we need to be educating people who are then policymakers and who are, because when you go around here and you see the level of the conversation, it's not about calories. So of course that created a reverse, adverse reaction. But if instead they were informing on the nutritious content,
again, I think one of the things we've learned at Stone Barns, it's talking to nutritionists that visit, it's very tricky ground. I mean, we know actually very little. We know a lot about the nutritional content of the food, and we know what's bad for you. In terms of what's actually ideal for you and nutritional health, to look at any given label on any given product and try and discern that as a consumer is pretty unrealistic. It depends on your genetics. It depends on what you had for breakfast. It depends on what you're going to have for lunch tomorrow. That combination...
On your mood.
It depends. On your mood and how you absorb the food. But that combination and level of study is not one prescription for all. So it becomes, I think, soil, right? And the
neither
focus
is the
on
calorie, by the way, because you and I might burn our calories much faster than someone else. So it is really complicated. It's also a design challenge, going back to design.
Well, it's also, I think, what it points to is that we need a lot more research linking soil health to nutrient density. There hasn't been a lot of that research, and that's something that Blue Hill at Stone Barns and Stone Barns Center is trying to do, is to really drill down on how soil health impacts the flavor and nutrition of the crops that we're growing. And I think it's really an open area for research and discovery.
I think about the one most important thing we've learned is not that we're eating too much, it's that we're eating too little in terms of diversity. And we need an expanded diet. And an expanded diet would require a more diversified set of ingredients, and that would give farmers an opportunity to farm more regeneratively. But they need a market for those products. They can't have a market for one thing in the rotation and no market for the other 5 or 6. That's not economically sustainable.
Yeah. And what's so interesting with what's going on at Stone Barns and Blue Hill is that integrated research, so that when there's a rotation, some of the lesser known or what you call margin crops are actually being created in a tasteful, delicious way. So we have a massive need to educate on creating this diversity so that we have more micronutrients and better health, because it's something that, if you look at there's not a lot of applicability with the rotational crops. So you've got corn, you've got soy, you've got wheat, but you don't have all those lesser known cover crops that actually enhance and create the soil health that we're looking to have.
Absolutely. And some, because what concerns me about proving scientifically that a certain component is going to be good for everyone and a certain other is not, is that it'll never happen because there are too many variables. And that's one thing that I also learned in Drawdown, is that many solutions that make sense and that work are spreading through social media, through documentaries, through information. It's much more of a hands-on thing. And as a vegetarian would say, you want all the colors on your plate. So it's such a simple concept that I wonder whether that could become a form of labeling. Put color on your plate, then of course indicating that it can't be artificial coloring, but natural coloring, because then you're bringing your minerals and your different vitamins and, in your... It's just, do you think that, because I feel we really have all the solutions, do you feel confident that they're going to scale fast enough and that there can be this cultural conversion that is so necessary sooner rather than later?
I was just going to make a pitch for Food System 6. So can I just make a pitch for what Mrenska's doing? I am an advisor to Mrenska's organization, and I think what we need, along with what David Barber's doing as well, is to really support entrepreneurs that are working on food system change and identify them, train them, find ways to incubate their work and train them so that there's more funding connected to some of these innovations that will have great potential to enhance our food system. But I'll leave it to Renska to say more.
Thank you. The answer is yes, but we need a lot more investment into the kinds of solutions that are going to promote the style of production that was featured in the film that really forms the basis of regenerative agriculture principles, which I don't think we've had much time to unpack here, but is a more integrated, diversified type of production system. And the great benefit that we have is we're in 2019 and there are a lot of technological innovations that we can leverage and properly deploy into the support of that kind of transition, which in my opinion will help accelerate that transition. So we have, I can obviously speak about my portfolio companies, but we have a company called Pasture Map that is a software-based platform to help support sustainable livestock ranchers in managing their rotations. That is a really critical part of a regenerative production system. The role of livestock to be very catalytic in drawing down carbon in the soil. A blockchain-enabled commodity trading platform that allows more transparency in the financial accounting system. Another really critical component of a regenerative production system is bringing value back to the farmer, bringing value back to the producer. There's a lot of those types of innovations out there, but the vast majority of the investment in capital, and we've talked about this a little bit, is still today being dedicated towards the existing system and the existing paradigm and improving it around the edges. And I think everybody on this stage is a big fan of putting capital towards the kinds of solutions that are going to create a new paradigm.
I'm curious to know what's the balance of your pitches to investors? How much of the hard facts do you deliver, and how much instead do you try and be inspirational about the solution? I mean, I'm interested in knowing, because I think that's a challenge for us all. You know, the bad news is people go out of any conference that's really focusing on too much of the bad news, heavy-hearted and feeling like, forget it, we're doomed. Sometimes if you're too inspirational and you're missing I'm interested in understanding the balance, or what's the alchemy of your message?
I'm happy to share, and I think both Sue and David can weigh in. It has to be both. We are very focused on positive, forward-looking solutions that also have large addressable markets attached to them, and very strong and sound, resilient and capable entrepreneurs to lead those businesses into the future. If you don't have enough inspiration and you're not focused on the vision, but you're hardcore technical, then you need a little bit of support, I think, to round that out. It has to be a balance. You have to provide a vision for, I mean, you're building, many of the entrepreneurs we support are building solutions in markets that don't exist. So we have one of the co-founders of Tesla come and talk to our entrepreneurs to talk about how do you do that. It's not an easy proposition, but you really do need to talk about the vision of the food system, back it up with science and evidence base, and then draw people along on your journey. I mean, it has to have a component of story in it, I think.
Oh yeah, that's vital. But basically what I was pointing to is how convincing are you to the people that you're pitching to? I would imagine vary, but we want to, you know.
I'll just say that I think that Renska and her team is very convincing. I've invested in her First Course Capital Fund and some of the other companies in her portfolio through Food System 6. And you want to look at not only, you know, the concept, but who's the entrepreneur, and do you have faith they have the management skills and the ability to deliver. And so it's a holistic analysis of the company and the management and the vision and also the support along the way so that they can grow to scale. So I think that you have to look at the whole system when you're looking at investments. And what I found is that if the idea is good and it's backed up by a good leadership team, and you also want to look at the financials, otherwise, I mean, you can have an idea, but if it doesn't seem, you know, and you also take your gut. I mean, I also look at investments, I look at the hard data, and then I say, does this seem like it's going to go? So a lot of it is that sort of intangible quality, along with, you know, I'd say 90%, 95% of really good analysis.
Thank you. And what's your experience with this, David?
I think there's an endless appetite for investment in the future. I think you know, look at Tesla's market cap as compared to Ford's. It's incredible considering where they are in the cycle, but they've brought people and spirit and a confidence in the future along with them. I don't know that they'll make it. I think there's a lot of risk to that business, but you know, I think one interesting thing of the last few weeks is that Beyond Meat, whatever you know feel about its long-term potential, you know, now has a market cap of 25% of Tyson, and it's a very small company by comparison. But people see a future and a demand for that market globally, and believe that they have first mover advantage, and they're pouring capital into it, which can give them. You know, capital, if they deploy it correctly, is a weapon. I mean, towards winning. It can really accelerate the idea of change. So I think there are a lot of bright spots. I think the consumer has clearly communicated that they want different, that they want companies and brands with purpose that back up what they say they're doing with what they're actually doing. I don't think. You know, perfection can be a dangerous thing in this time because there's a lot of compromises that need to be made to get to scale in current. But you have to balance them, and you have to keep the consumer going along with you, and that's good brand building. And I think there are entrepreneurs and companies that will do it and will be very successful.
And it's good you mentioned that also because they really nailed the taste. I mean, those Beyond Meat is good. it tastes good, and it looks like a burger. So I think you can easily, I don't know how it compares price-wise to you know, a decent burger, beef burger. Do you know?
I think it's relatively competitive, but I don't know that highly processed. I mean, just personally, I don't know that highly processed foods, whether it's Beyond Meat or any other concept, is our answer. I think, you know, properly stewarded agriculture that isn't done in a laboratory is a key part of what we want to be doing. We need more farmers generally, and we need more farmers stewarding the land. And while these companies certainly have a place, and to the extent that Beyond Meat can take a shot in the side of CAFO operations, I'm all for it. But it shouldn't replace the beef burger, in my view.
It's not either or. It's definitely an and.
Yeah.
And if you look at just the environmental footprint of Beyond Burger, it's enough, I think, to have a lot of people choosing that over beef. So there's many different ways that you can, you know, take a look at, you know, the whole system. And I think you're going to need definitely more farmers and also more access to local food. But you're going to need everything from the cellular, you know, meat industry to the highly processed,
the in
to
vitro
fresh
meat. Yeah.
What I was getting at was that the temptation to take all of the things in the less diversified diet that we have now and produce them in a laboratory is something we should be a little wary of with regard to the farmer, because eventually we could all get our nutrition in a pill with a glass of water and we just don't have to eat. I mean, that's where it could lead. So I think if you want to be eating real food, the idea is not to replace the burger with a Beyond Meat burger entirely. Just quantify and qualify the burger that you are eating, treat it as a special occasion, make sure it was done in a proper, ecologically responsible way, and enjoy it. If you're a vegetarian for other reasons, great, and all due respect, but it's not this idea that everybody should switch to things we cultivate. That's crazy talk.
No, I agree. Flexitarian diets, I mean, if everyone reduced their meat consumption to a couple of times a week, the reduction of CO2 emissions would be massive. So it's really, you know, a matter of, I mean, we have exported models to developing countries that unfortunately, you know, are being incorporated, and until they see, I think, a massive, but tell me if you agree, a massive transition on behalf of more developed countries to different economical models, they're going to say, you know, why can't I enjoy the luxury that you have, you know, taken advantage of for such a long time?
But there's, I'll be quiet after this, but there's opportunity, I think, for compromise, and I do think business and investors also have this tendency to be very binary, you know, sort of Beyond Meat or grass-fed burger and sort of one end of the spectrum and that's it. Just to use one example, at Stone Barns, we're producing a pork sausage at the moment for diners that is pork from pigs on the farm, but it's also 40% oats. And it is just the most, with all, you know, modesty aside, it is just the most delicious sausage. You don't miss the balance of pork. In fact, the oats adds flavor. It's a great rotation crop for farmers, and it's 40% less meat. It's not a Beyond Burger, but it's 40% less meat. If everybody were to be eating that kind of sausage in quantity, it would have significant impact. So there's all this stuff in between, you know, Beyond Burger and the CAFO system that there's plenty of room to explore and plenty of ways to help solve the problem.
And just one other thing about, you know, you can have vegans, you can have vegetarians, but to have a healthy regenerative, which was the topic of this conversation, food system, you do need animal inputs. So the question is, how do you use the whole animal from, as Dan said, from nose to tail, and actually innovate, like the pork sausage, which is incredibly tasty. So I think that you need a lot of innovation that includes, you know, both animal inputs as well as grain and vegetarian.
Just one other piece to add to that, that in addition to biodiversity, which is one of the critical components of a regenerative production system, we also need genetic diversity. So we heard in the film about seeds, critical component, but also genetic diversity in our animal agriculture and animal proteins. So in the US, we're heavily reliant, I think over 90%, of the poultry that is consumed in the U.S. is one genetic strain. I mean, it's remarkably unresilient. I mean, as David said, I mean, we are absolutely functioning within a highly, highly risky, unresilient production paradigm. So just even thinking about the ways in which we can be reintroducing genetic diversity into animal agriculture is really critical for a variety of factors, not the least of which is human health, ecological health, and again, the resilience of our system, which I think is ultimately what regenerative agriculture is really representative of, is a more resilient and robust system that can withstand different forces, and there are many right now affecting the system.
I don't know, David, if you could talk a little bit about seed row 7 and just in terms of biodiversity and seed breeding.
Well, I think that work, which my brother is leading, is just about involving chefs in the breeding work that traditional seed breeding does. The sort of confiscation of that line of intelligence by big business has over time, at least in the US, but I think more broadly as well, forced breeders to follow a worksheet that's dictated by large corporations who are not interested in flavor. They're interested in yield, and they're interested in resistance to Roundup and in the ability to grow in multiple climates around the world. And so the idea of regional foods, regional breeding activities that create unique flavors that are from a place has largely been, if not eliminated, but reduced. And these breeders have knowledge, they have endless amounts of science that they've gathered over the last 50 years that they can employ to this thinking. They just need to be asked. And they need to be working with people like my brother that have palates that are at the forefront of what people find delicious. And they can create new crops that if they are distinct enough and people can recognize the flavor and value of that, they will demand it. And if they demand it, farmers will grow it.
Absolutely, and it is, a matter of connecting the dots. And we live in a country where regional flavors are such a part of our culture that you forget that, any other country could really incorporate this experience. And then in turn, to go back to our theme of regenerating and what your brother was saying about a genius of place. Then we get into a whole much broader conversation that is so meaningful. So really it's a matter of adopting a holistic approach and connecting the health of soil to the health of our bodies, the role of microbes, which thank you for reminding.
I can have 20 different flavors of risotto in Italy in a country that's the size of New York State. I mean, we don't have that in the U.S. And that's your traditions.
So we're so happy to be here for that reason, one of the reasons.
But maybe in a global world, I mean, how can we compact this information and deliver it to sources or to places that really, could help those seeds germinate? How willing are people to recuperate local traditions in areas that are, deserts in terms of not only the food, but the step before the food, which is the awareness of, where they're coming from, really.
Some of it is recultivating old traditions, but I think a bigger part of it is going to be forging new ones. I think the idea of going back is not as appealing to young people, and particularly in America, there isn't much to go back to. We don't have a great agricultural history to benchmark against. We weren't farmers to begin with. We immigrated there because we didn't have land and we weren't farmers. And the Garden of Eden that was the U.S. and the prairies produced a very bountiful agricultural system, but it's not anything to emulate in terms of sustainability. It never had to be. Other countries, other cultures have great history to offer about that negotiation between the landscape and cuisine and nutrition and how you support a culture and a people with the land you have available. Those are lessons worth examining. But there's so much that we've learned and so much we can do that I think we should try and keep young people focused on what their future is, not our past.
Okay, so to end, what is your focus moving forward? And if there were a seed that you would take away from Seeds and Chips, what would it be?
For me, it's international education. I just think that
International.
I've been raising my two kids and spent just way too much time in the U.S. And we tend to be very U.S. focused. And there's so much great work going on globally. And if you're talking about regional systems and regional agriculture for the long term, there's so much that we can learn from other parts of the world and bring into the thinking that we're doing at Stone Barns, and hopefully things that they can take from us, in that kind of exchange. There needs to be a lot more of it.
Oh, that's interesting. And just sub-question, do you see that younger people have more interest in food cultivation or in food preparation? So from the farm to the kitchen, or from the kitchen to the fork?
Young people have interest in Instagrammable moments and experiences. And if they can do that, farming, eating, cooking, they will, and we should encourage all three.
I was going to say that, one of the takeaways is just continuing to collaborate with global partners. I've met some wonderful people here, and I think just having this opportunity to share knowledge. I have a platform called Musings. It's a digital platform.
Which is fantastic, and everyone should go see. It's really very inspiring.
But what's fantastic for me is that as much as it highlights innovation across a number of different industries and categories, I've met some incredible entrepreneurs here that I look forward to profiling. So I think that the more we can get together, the more we can find best practices and share those practices, the better. And I think that's one real advantage of Seeds and Chips, and it's wonderful to be here for that reason.
I would echo those sentiments, and then I would just add to the power of looking for innovation and entrepreneurship in communities that are tackling problems. I think that the best solutions can come from the people who are actually facing whatever sets of challenges, be it resource constraints or natural resource constraints or others, but really looking to, I think farmers are among, and ranchers and growers are among the most innovative problem solvers out there because they've had to be. So just would add that, but thank you.
Thank you very much. And to close, because we mentioned it, meanwhile, if someone has a question, please get a microphone. But to end on the note, since you will be seeing Broken Nature, and I hope, well, many people from here I'm sure already have, but there's a story, very inspiring story on Maurice Cox, who's the head of development at the city, of urban development in Detroit. And what he's done using nature and therefore food production, gardening, to revitalize the city is so deeply inspiring that it really, can. So to talk about American models, that's why I brought it up. I think that's a very interesting model to scale, and it brings in what you're all doing. And if it can be a prototype of other types of cities, as you were saying, rightfully so, looking forward, but really bringing this different awareness into the game, I think it would be really interesting. Thank you all very much. Question?
Hi, thank you very much for an interesting conversation. But could I, and I know we're running out of time a little bit, but could I ask the panelists to give some kind of summary of what actually is regenerative agriculture and what is its untapped potential?
Yeah, I mean, the definition is a tough one to pin. I'll give you, our interpretation. What we're trying to do at Stone Barns is encourage the farming activity to build soil health. So we are measuring success of the farm based on the level of organic matter and the biological activity in the soil. Food is a byproduct of that exercise. And the restaurant, the chef's, the cook's job, and frankly the diner's job is to consume it. And so if you think about it, in a global system, I would describe it as more of a supply-driven system. You're turning to the farmer and you're saying, what should you be growing based on the ecology of your soil? And if you demonstrate that you're doing that, we'll figure out how to market it. Basically, we'll buy it. We'll buy the whole farm just like buying the entire animal. If you buy that kind of a rotation equally across the farm and allow the farmer to do that, that produces a regenerative system for the soil. But it's a very different diet. And we are extremely privileged where we sit on this property because we have a captive audience. People are traveling a great distance, and they're essentially surrendering to one meal where they agree to eat that way. And we don't throw, 2 or 3 things at them. We throw 20 things at them or 30 things at them. And so if they don't like a couple or it's too weird, it's not their whole meal. So it's a very different, luxurious experiment. But it's a sign of how you might approach, in our view, a regenerative system. So going to your farmer's market and not demanding your tomato grown a mile from your house, but asking the farmer at your farmer's market, what are you growing, why are you growing it? And if he shouldn't be growing tomatoes, don't ask him to. It's not sustainable, actually. It's sweet and lovely and probably flavorful for a while, but it's not regenerative.
And I would just say there's also, there's regenerative and there's restorative. So many of the practices are low-till, it's cover cropping, it's keeping, sequestering the carbon in the soil. You're not doing a lot, like every time you till the soil, you release the carbon dioxide. So it's finding ways to keep the soil covered, and much like what David said, it's just what does the soil and the land instruct you to do? So it's really listening to the soil and what the capability is instead of saying, I want to grow a certain amount of crops and then use various inputs that actually end up degrading the soil. So it really is looking at a whole systems approach and also a zero waste approach so that you're able to continue putting inputs from the farm to build the soil health, whether it's composting, mulching, but the key is really to keep the soil covered and to be innovative in crop rotations to keep the soil as healthy as possible.
And I'll add one thing which is very well documented in Drawdown, which is silvopasture, because again, I think that's a big change in mentality, which it's basically means grazing animals in forests. And it's a win-win situation because their manure nourishes the ground, because in the shade the animals produce better milk and meat, because they, in the environment of a forest, more methane, is absorbed. So there are some things that are ancient. When you were talking about not going back, some things really go back, to way beyond national borders, and they're just practices that make a lot of sense. But the challenge is to change mentalities, really. Other questions?
Hi. I spent a matter of time on a regenerative farm, well-funded in the United States. Great place to learn. And something that upsets me is that a number of the other young, educated, ambitious people that were there with me, who I think would love to be creating their own regenerative farm, similarly funded, similarly ambitious, haven't yet found their land, haven't yet found their access to starting this similar farm. What can be done to propel these people forward quickly so that we can get to a point where consumers have more access to this food?
Yeah, sure, I'll field that one. I think it's, quickly is difficult. I think the short answer 10 years ago would have been to find a town and an area and a plot of land where you could align yourself with restaurants and a farmer's market. And I'm just speaking about the US, and you could develop a market for that. I think the farmer's market solution has sort of peaked. And I think it's actually starting to decline now a little bit. For young farmers, what we need is young, progressive farmers to go on to bigger farms. That's the area in the US where we're losing quite badly to the industrial system. And the average age of the farmer is over 65, and their kids aren't going into it. So the new kids that want a big piece of it have to think about farming on a larger scale, and there's no easy bullet on how to do that. Again, because you start with those rotations at scale, you need markets. And you may have a market for one crop or two crops, but that does not a rotation make. So it's a great question. I wish I had a good answer.
I was just going to add that there's a lot of land trusts that are looking at that as well, where they can hire farmers to work the land, but it is a very complicated issue. And Stone Barns does have a farmer apprenticeship program where we try to match the farmer with different people that have land that they want to put into regenerative practice. But it's very difficult, and it is a tough question. But let's hope more people start to look at how to innovate in that way and create some solutions.
And to add a note of hope, there are many regenerative and restorative agriculture really do include a very large body of practices. For example, mentioning urban agriculture, you can also, I would say, would you agree, that you're restoring in a way the health of land if you're using land that was deployed differently until then. It might not reach the optimum level of health to then have this more holistic relationship between the health of soil and the health of food, but some lands, some bodies of land do take more time to leave a degraded state. And then, would you agree? Would you put that into the category of important experiences to have in terms of restorative agriculture, regenerative agriculture? Meaning bringing degraded land to a better level. And then, it's... Any other questions? Okay, thank you very, very much.